On today's episode of the DeRaud-Messinger Show, we're previewing and predicting number 23 Kansas State at number 7 Texas. Dylan, this is a great matchup, and if you're a Texas fan, this might be the biggest matchup of the second half of the regular season. So what a better way to start the great month of November. And of course, by starting the great month of November, I'm going to talk about the game info. The game is Saturday, the 4th of November at 11 a.m. Central Time. We love those 11 a.m. kicks at Darrell K. Royal Texas Memorial Stadium in Austin, Texas. Televised on Fox. So, Dylan, I'm sensing a Gus Johnson sighting here. The game
Uh-oh.
has Texas favored by 4 points. Dylan, the scouting report. How are you feeling about this Kansas State defense?
Yeah, I don't think this is a bold take, Devon. This arguably is probably the best defense Texas has faced since Alabama. I don't think that's too outlandish to say right now with the way they've been playing. They're number one in the Big 12 in points allowed with 15.9 per game. Texas is allowing 16, so they're neck and neck right there. But they still have that point 0.1, obviously. And then they're number two in the Big 12 in rush yards allowed with 109.4 per game, obviously after Texas, who's first. And they're tied for second in rush yards per attempt at 3.7. So they've been difficult to run on. Obviously, they are looks like still allowing 100 plus yards per game on the ground. But again, that's one of the best in the Big 12. And they're number three in the Big 12 in total offense allowed with 343.8. Now on the other side of that, though, they are number nine in the Big 12 in pass yards allowed with 234.4 per game, and then number 10 in the Big 12 in turnovers forced with only averaging about 1.3 per game. So they've struggled, not necessarily struggled, but they haven't gotten the amount of turnovers that you probably want to see defensively, as well as you can pass on this team for sure. Now, with Malik Murphy, this is only going to be a second start. So that's going to be a matchup to watch between him and this Kansas State secondary. But the two biggest names to know, though, are these linebacking core. It's Austin Moore with 43 total tackles, 1.5 sacks on the season, and 9 tackles for loss. Devon is tied for fifth in the Big 12. So he's been getting into the backfield for most of the season. Then next to him, you got linebacker Desmond Purnell. He's got 30 tackles, 1 pass deflection, 1 interception, and 1 forced fumble. So those two linebackers are something to watch here going in this game. Then in the secondary, you've got safety Kobe Savage, great name obviously, as well as 43 tackles and 2 interceptions. Then Marquise Siegel, 39 total tackles and 3 pass deflections. So their safety's been playing pretty well. Obviously, you got
Siegel.
Kobe Savage with Siegel. Looked it up.
That's fitting
Yeah,
in the secondary. A no-fly zone, but there's going to be seagulls flying in Austin apparently. But okay, puns,
and he's
puns.
going to be looking for scraps if we want to keep this pun going. So,
Oh gosh,
but
okay.
yeah, this safety group obviously definitely goes into your theory. Your safety's got one of tied for the most tackles on the year. Obviously, they've been letting up some big plays back there, so that's something to watch out for. And then with the cornerbacks, you've got Will Lee the third, 30 total tackles, 2 interceptions, 3 pass deflections, and 1 forced fumble. Then the other side, you have sophomore Jacob Parrish, 23 tackles, 1 interception, and he's tied for second in the Big 12 with 8 passes defended. So he's been somewhat of a lockdown corner there on the other side. Obviously, still some inexperience, but it'll be curious to see kind of how he's lining up, whether that's against Adonai Mitchell or against Xavier Worthy, and having to deal with that speed that Texas presents. And then lastly, Devin, this front four right here, they've got defensive end Khalid Duke. He leads the team in sacks with 5. He's tied for fourth in the Big 12, and he had a 2-sack game against Troy. Then you got defensive end Nate Matlick. He's got 4 sacks, and his first 3 sacks were in the first 3 games of the season, and then he's only had 1 against Houston. So he's going to be looking to get going here against Texas and finally, tear off a few more sacks for the season. And then you got the big boy defensive tackle, Javon Banks. He's got 2 sacks. He's going to be plugging up the middle up front for Kansas State, Devin. So this has been a good Kansas State team defensively. Obviously, as I highlighted earlier, though, you can pass on this team, and they've struggled with those turnovers.
Yeah, definitely doing. I want to do some number research, and of course, that's my specialty here. The defense has a 23rd best in terms of rushing defense for Kansas State compared to 75th best passing defense. So that just backs up what Dylan was saying right there. Of course, in a ideal scenario, you have a quarterback that's comfortable and confident back there. And Dylan, correct me if I'm wrong, Murphy looks pretty confident out there. I don't know if you guys saw before his first snaps. last weekend against BYU, he was literally dancing and kind of jumping around. So he's confident. Let's see how comfortable he'll be this weekend. But of course, yet again, in terms of strengths and weaknesses of that Kansas State team on defense, it stacks up well, Dylan, because they're going to have to force a relatively inexperienced quarterback to make some experienced plays. But offensively, Kansas State, just to open it up, Dylan, has the 13th best scoring offense in America. That's quite impressive. Kansas State, not that they've been not a scoring team in history, but they're a little bit more, we're going to beat you defensively, we're going to slug you out, and just a little bit more offense in Iowa. Of course, a lot more with Deuce Vaughn.
A little more. That's not hard to do. I'm going to be honest.
That's a low bar. But yeah, of course, the years of Deuce Vaughn, they've been scoring, and Colin Klein before that. So it's not that they haven't been able to do it, but this year, 13th best, quite impressive, and the 5th best rushing offense. So that's a little hint for what's about to come here. But senior quarterback Will Howard, he's no stranger to facing the Longhorns, Dylan. He leads the way with just a little bit over 1,600 passing yards, 14 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. And Dylan, we're talking about the Wildcats, and I know you love the Wildcat quarterback. You get a little bit of Wildcat quarterback action with the backup quarterback in Avery Johnson, who has 6 rushing touchdowns this season. And a fun fact, Howard actually also has 6 as well, and they have a similar amount of rushing yards. Howard adds a little over 300, Johnson's in the 200s. But that's just to say, of course, the passing threat can be there. I'd say it's average with the conference standard, Dylan, so nothing crazy. But on the ground, you have to be careful because Howard, who's known as a pocket passer, still gets his looks on the ground as well. And then the interesting part, I talked to Dylan about this briefly. The leading receiver for Kansas State is senior Phillip Brooks. Now, why is it interesting? Because he is that Deuce Vaughn Jr., Dylan. You got the 5'8" size, but he has 437 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns on the year. Nothing too outstanding in terms of numbers, but that's more so just because of the style of play versus the player itself. He's followed in terms of receiving yards by 6'4" junior tight end Ben Sinnott, who also, Dylan, was a first-teamer on the All-Big 12 list, or the preseason, voted on by the media, but I believe he got voted in as a fullback, so, he's kind of cheating the system there, but of course, good blocker. And then at running back, Dylan, I'm going to mention receiving from the backfield right now, but the sophomore running back, DJ Giddens, is actually the 3rd biggest receiving threat for the Wildcats. That's my transition for you. 240 receiving yards and a touchdown. But Giddens is pretty darn good at running the football as well, with 722 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns, and just above 6 yards per carry. Now, Dylan, this is off topic of Kansas State and Texas real quick, but Ollie Gordon is now in the lead for the Big 12 rushing title, which is surprising news, especially after Jonathan Brooks, of course, was the leader there for a little bit. So we'll see if Jonathan Brooks tries to reclaim that after the game against Kansas State. But a little Ollie Gordon shout out on a random video we got here. And then senior running back Trayshawn Ward also adds 458 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. So there's a lot of names there, guys. But to really sum it down, Kansas State is versatile. I know Sark likes talking about Texas as being versatile. Kansas State, they got a bunch of different options that can beat you. Of course, they're predominantly a running team. So if they're going to beat you, expect that. But I also wanted to write, Dylan, on HornSports, of course, brought to you by HornSports here. I wrote about Will Howard being able to beat Texas with his arm. Now we'll see if I predict that at the end of this video. You guys are going to have to stay tuned. But against Texas, seemingly you get a prime Aaron Rodgers every other weekend, Dylan. I know BYU didn't do too great at that, if I'm being honest, but Will Howard has shown signs to be able to beat Texas with his arm. But this is a team that is fully his this season. There's a lot of pressure coming in at the number 7 team in the country. Can he do it? And then lastly, I just wanted to mention the offensive line. I got to give the Big Uglies a shout out. They're tied 28th in the country in terms of sacks allowed, which is quite good if you had to ask me. 1.38 sacks per game allowed, and they're starting not 1, not 2, but 3 6-year seniors on that group. I give them the Perry Ellis Award, Dylan. Just a lot of experience. And experience is probably even underselling the experience there in terms of a term. But yes, they are an experienced group. Now, all offensive line and offensive comments aside, we move to X factors. Dylan, who is needing to win this game?
Yeah, so I think obviously the biggest things that you can point to is how Malik Murphy is going to handle his second game against an even better defense that might do a better job taking away the run game, right, in this one. So that's kind of the obvious one, but in terms of or the obvious thing going into this game, but X factor wise, I think the biggest thing is going to be this defensive front for Texas, making Kansas one-dimensional on offense, especially in the passing game. Because as they've shown throughout the season for Kansas State, if they get into obvious passing situations and third down, Will Howard has shown the propensity to throw some interceptions, Devon. He's got 7 interceptions on the season with 14 touchdowns. So he's tied for second in the Big 12 in interceptions thrown. So law of probability, if you get him to throw more, he's more likely to throw some of those juicy interceptions that secondary is going to want to see, right? So
I gotta add something too.
Look for
I think I read he's better against the blitz. His interception totals are lower against the blitz than it is against just standard coverage. So it is something interesting, especially with a Texas group that, while they have a good defensive line, and I agree that's something to watch out for, it is going to be interesting because they just have struggled to get to the quarterback itself. They've stopped the run.
Yeah.
A+. But yeah, Howard, we'll see how that fares. But I'll let you continue on here.
Well, that even proves my point here for the 4 guys that I wanted to mention, and that's going to be Devondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Alfred Collins, and Barron Sorrell. Because if he's better against the blitz, right, you're going to just be most of the time sending those 4, maybe an extra guy to help. So they're going to be needing to get push up front against your Perry Ellis offensive lineman and really just create some of that pressure and keeping the guys that like on spy. So maybe Anthony Hill kind of gets some work in the sense of if these quarterbacks that they like to deploy, like in Will Howard's case, likes to run, you want that feral animal chasing him down so he doesn't feel like he can get away with that. So he's got to throw the ball. And then again, those turnovers are going to be so key for this Texas secondary that, when you compare them against the other teams in the league that you would presume are the best, that secondary does not match up very well. So that's a weak point that we've known about with Texas for most of the season. And, with the defensive front playing well in this game, if they do, it's going to be a deciding factor in this one, I feel like.
Yeah, Dylan, I actually did not really stray from your pick there. I went Texas defensive line as one of them. I talked about the Kansas State running attack. Now, in terms of names, I know maybe I didn't sound too energetic. I love watching Kansas State football, Dylan. Okay, there's my shout out. Of course, Texas football, when it's at its prettiest, is pretty beautiful to watch. But Kansas State football, it's just a lot of guys doing the right thing and it adds up. Now, that's the shout out here. Texas defensive line, you're going to have to stop a team that does all of the right things. They do the small things. They have the Perry Ellis stamped offensive line. Now, I know that might hurt some of you Kansas State fans to hear Perry Ellis attached to it. My apologies. I don't make up the award names. The award names make themselves up. But Kansas State, the running attack, yet again, do they have the big name guys? No. However, they have the guys that are talented enough to do some damage. And as I said earlier when I was naming off some stats, they've done the damage. Now against Texas, the Texas defensive line has been great this season. Can they continue to be great and really shut down that running game, forcing Howard to throw in situations where you can drop people back? As I've discussed with Dylan, Howard's done a lot better against the blitz. If you can drop guys back and make him read coverages, you're going to be in a little bit better of a spot. But of course, that depends on the guys that Dylan mentioned. Can they get home to the quarterback and stuff the run up front? And then on the offensive side for Texas, of course, Dylan, I think you mentioned it first. It's pretty obvious. Malik Murphy, this is the Malik Murphy game. Last weekend, he wasn't needed too much. He did have 2 turnovers, Dylan, and they came pretty early in the game. I think one was first quarter interception, and then he opened the second quarter with the fumble. The first one,
the fumble wasn't necessarily his fault, though. That got blown up fast. I mean, you want him to hold on to the ball, but that one was it wasn't as obvious as the turnover, like the pick.
Yes,
pick that he threw. That was bad.
Pick, even then, the pick, I think Xavier Worthy, there's some sort of miscommunication, but still cannot throw that ball. But I agree, Dylan. I mean, they were 2 bad turnovers, but I can also kind of sympathize with the turnovers. I know I'm very anti-turnover, so me saying that is the most radical thing that's ever happened. But they are points of improvement. He's seen, where he's going to screw up. He's going to take this in, in terms of studying this whole week. Come on back to Saturday and be ready to, fire. But for Murphy, if Texas wants to be successful, I mean, I say this every time I mention quarterbacks, but he's going to have a clean sheet in terms of turnovers in this game. Kansas State is going to, take advantage of the turnovers. And BYU actually did as well, Dylan. I believe they scored a touchdown on every single Texas turnover. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was the case. Murphy, this is not an easy team to beat on all cylinders. You're going to have to stay clear of interceptions and, of course, give Jonathan Brooks some running room by making the defense account for your arm. Now, Dylan, let's talk about it. Danger level. I'm sure you got it a little bit higher this week.
Yeah, I've got it sitting at about an 8 here. Just in terms of, I know I gave BYU a 5. That was because it just didn't feel like BYU had the identity of a team, right? They were still figuring that out. With Kansas State, as you've mentioned very clearly, Devon, they have an identity and they want to be physical, especially in the run game and defensively. But now they got a quarterback that does have an arm, albeit, again, like I highlighted a lot, the interceptions have been a problem. But even in that case, they can still throw the ball. So they're not one-dimensional with this run game. There is a way they want to beat you, and that's obviously limiting your scoring defensively and then running the ball incredibly well to set up the pass or even draw you away from possible quarterback keepers. So they have the identity that you want to see out of a team, and that's why they've been so successful. But again, I do think Texas has the ability to stop them in key areas, and they've got the talent all over the place that matches up well against Kansas State in this sense. Because I think, as you saw with Kansas beating Oklahoma is more of the skill players, but Texas has got more of the trenches guys. They can be physical back. They're more well-versed in games like this against teams that want to be physical.
Yeah, Dylan, I definitely had a higher danger level last weekend, and I attributed it to just the question marks. And some of those question marks were answered last week, and I did give it a 7. Some were answered. I was concerned about how Murphy would perform in week 1. It wasn't necessarily a vote of doubt, but more so a vote of we just haven't seen him play yet. With 1 week under the belt, of course, the concerns aren't gone, Dylan, but he did look at least comfortable. And mistakes were had, of course, like I discussed, but some of those were pretty easily correctable. Like the interception, you just can't be throwing something like that next time. That's, the obvious. But I'm going to give this also an 8 here, Dylan, just a step up against the BYU. Yet again, the BYU one was more of context versus just the opponent. This one is an opponent score of an 8. This is not a context score. Kansas State, as I mentioned at the opening of the video, is probably the best team that Texas will play in the second half of their regular season. Yet again, bowl games, etc. We don't know. And we don't care, quite honestly, Dylan, until we get there.
Ooh.
1 week at a time. That's got to be the John Wick mantra that these players are advocating for. But until we get there, Kansas State, the biggest opponent left on this schedule. And yet again, Dylan, I mentioned it, Kansas State, their weaknesses and strengths just match up well against this Texas team, which is the scary part. They're on defense, as I said, the passing game is kind of the weakness for Kansas State. However, Murphy being inexperienced at quarterback, let's see if he can take advantage of that. Of course, Jonathan Brooks has been the star player, but that's Kansas State's strength on defense. We'll see. I'm going to give it an 8. Too bad we can't get a light show for this one, Dylan. It's a 11 a.m. kick. They bring out the new lights and then only have one game to show them off so far. But anyway, Devon rants aside. How are you feeling, Dylan? Predictions?
Yeah, so like we talked about, there was enough flashes for me to have some confidence with Malik Murphy going into it, even though there was some lowlights with some turnovers and some tight window throw Devons. I know we talked about it. It was like
he's a redshirt freshman quarterback. You're gonna get what you pay for. And some of those though, Dylan, they did work out. I don't know if you remember the throw to JT Sanders. It was right over the head of a DB. Of course, Sanders got popped on the play, but he somehow held on to it. But I don't want to put my tight end in that spot. But hey, it was like a 30-yard completion or something. So Who am I saying anything about? Anyway, go ahead.
Well, it's the consistency factor, and plus it helps because I was about to get to it in a second, but like it helps to have guys like Jatavian Sanders to catch those type of passes, as well as just with Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell, you can mix it up a million different ways in order to get them the ball. You saw it a lot with just quick throws. They were trying to get Murphy comfortable. I don't even think they ran the ball maybe until a few plays later on that drive, Devon. So they definitely went into it knowing that BYU is expecting them to try to run the ball to take some pressure off of Murphy, and they were just like, "No, we're just gonna start slinging it a little bit, at least on the short yardage routes." So just getting the ball to Worthy on simple screens. AD Mitchell, you love those slant routes with him, right? And then that works up the potential deep ball, and maybe we'll see a little bit of that from Malik Murphy in this one finally, where he's just going to be airing it out a bit. So maybe the game plan or the playbook opens up a bit. Plus, you got Jonathan Brooks too, right? One of the best running backs in the country, so that helps a ton on the offensive side of the ball. So I've got plenty of confidence in that to not necessarily be like Kansas State's going to win this game. And then defensively, I think Texas really matches up well against what Kansas State is going to want to do. I know Gibbons has been playing really well. They mix in quarterback Avery Johnson, a lot of Wildcat quarterback plays. So that's something to watch out for. So the linebacking core is definitely going to be have a good game here and keying in on those on quarterback spies and not leaving their assignments. But again, they have experience in that field. They play Jalen Milroe, right? Like this is all the things that you've seen them work up towards this season. And just, I think as a culmination in a gritty game, I feel like is what's going to happen. Like Kansas State's not going to lie over in this one. They're going to keep coming back. They're going to bounce back, even if they're down 2 scores. They will be able to move the ball in some facet. So I've got Texas winning this 27-24. So ultimately avoiding the upset in this, but it's going to be a test at home. That's for sure.
You know, that sounds like a better score prediction than mine, if I'm just going to be honest, Dylan. I gave it Texas winning 34-31, but I don't know. I think this might be... I mean, Texas has scored over 30, I believe, in every single game so far this season.
Yeah.
But this feels like the type of game where you got 2 high-scoring offenses, but I feel like this could be a game where the defenses come into play. Now, I say that now, on Saturday when it's 56-48. Don't come at me, please. But it just feels like we're due for one of those at some point. I thought last weekend might have been it. BYU, of course, didn't do their part of the job, I must say, Dylan. Texas did quite well defensively. But it's going to be a defensive challenge for Texas. Usually I write a lot of notes on my prediction, Dylan, but, what's going to happen, I don't know. You guys have a better guess than me, I think, at home. But I do have Texas winning as well. I think I had it mostly, though, Dylan, because I just wanted to harp on your point. Texas is versatile offensively and defensively. Now, the defensive versatility, the secondary has some talented guys, but Dylan, they've just got an injury bug, and it's just been not too pretty, but it's been decent for most of the game. But when they do break, it does end up costing the team big time. But offensively, like Dylan said, Jatavian Sanders, Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, when John the Brooks is on, which has been pretty much every week, things are pretty good. The real question mark of the game is Malik Murphy when it comes down to it. He doesn't have to do anything crazy, I don't think, Dylan. And that's not a disrespect to Kansas State. I'm just saying he doesn't have to have a Heisman game. He just has to, of course, move the chains, get a couple of touchdown throws in, 1 or 2, but take care of the football. And I think things can play itself out. As Dylan said, this is a talented Longhorns team. To doubt them at this point, I wouldn't say it wouldn't be unwarranted just due to the sheer size of the game right here, Dylan. But they've proven to win games when they have been usually counted out in previous years. So that's what I'm going to leave it at. Dylan, any last second comments?
Devin, we're both going to be in attendance for this game. So
last minute
we haven't
decision
had this
over
before.
there.
Yeah, I'm going to be there waking up early. So, if they lose, if it doesn't go the way we think, I don't think I can go to a game ever again. So it's something to keep an eye on here.
Might be a real victory for you fans at DKR if that happens. Just kidding, just kidding. But more important than our score predictions, let us know yours down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check us out at HornSports.com. We got a ton of writings over there as well. And of course, as always, have a great rest of your day.